Use the Web Setup Wizard video tutorial. During this video, I will describe when to use the Web Setup Wizard and the steps to take before using it. I'll also explain how to use the Web Setup Wizard to create your initial Firebox configuration, and we'll show you how to resolve some common setup issues. When you set up a new Firebox, you use the Web Basic Network and Security settings. You can also use the Web Setup Wizard to create a new configuration or restore a saved configuration. You might have to do this, for example, if you forgot the administrator password or just want to start over. In this video, I will focus on how to use the Web Setup Wizard to create a new basic configuration. The Quick Start guide that came with your device also summarizes these steps. I want to point out that if your device supports Rapid Deploy Quick Start, you can eliminate the need for the Web Setup Wizard because Rapid Deploy Quick Start enables your Firebox to automatically download and use a configuration file that was created by WatchGuard. For more information about Rapid Deploy Quick Start, see the Introduction to Rapid Deploy video tutorial. I'll include a link to that video at the end of this one. Before you use the Web Setup Wizard, there are a few things you should do. After you activate your Firebox, you'll need to gather some basic network information from your ISP, find out DNS and WIN server information, and define your trusted network IP addresses. I'll go into each of these items in more detail next. To get started, you should log into the WatchGuard, activate your Firebox. Then download its feature key to unlock all of its functionality. If you are unsure how to activate your device, I recommend that you watch the Activate a Firebox or XTM Device video tutorial. I'll include a link to that video at the end of this one. After you activate your Firebox, it's time to gather your network. If your Firebox is behind a router that connects to an Internet Service Provider, or ISP, the first thing you need to know is how your Firebox will be assigned its external or public IP address. If you don't already know this information, you can ask your ISP. Your ISP could assign a static IP address, which is a permanent IP address that doesn't change. Or your ISP might use DHCP or PPPoE to dynamically assign IP addresses. Here's a list of some more questions you'll want to ask your ISP. You'll need to know the answers in order to complete the Web Setup Wizard. In addition, you'll need to find out how your device and WINs information. A DNS server converts a web address or domain name to an IP address. You can have your own DNS server, or you could use a DNS server hosted by your ISP. You'll also need a DNS server IP address if your external interface will use a static IP address, or if you want your Firebox to be a DHCP server for the computers on your network. If you're going to use a dynamic IP address on the external interface of your Firebox, you don't need to enter a DNS server address in the wizard. If you use a WIN server, it will always be installed on a computer on your network. You may use a WIN server if you use an older version of Microsoft Windows. If you don't know what WINs is, you likely don't need to include this information in the wizard. In the wizard, you'll need to define an IP address for the trusted interface of your Firebox. To know what IP address to use, you need to think about your private network because the trusted IP address you use must be in the same network range as the rest of your private network. If you're replacing an existing device, you may want to use the same IP address as the old device used. If you want, you can also enable the DHCP server on your Firebox so it can automatically assign IP addresses to the computers that connect to it. Many of our customers find that having their Firebox provide DHCP addresses for trusted computers is a good approach. Now that you have all your network information, your computer to the Firebox and start the Web Setup Wizard. If this is a new device, you can just power it on and the device will be ready for you to start the wizard. If this is not a new device, you must reset it to its factory default state first. Next, use a network cable to connect your computer to Interface 1 on the Firebox. The factory default IP address for Interface 1 is 10.0.1.1, so your computer also needs to have an IP address on that network in order to connect. If your computer is set up to get an IP address from DHCP, the Firebox will automatically assign your computer an IP address when you connect to Interface 1. Otherwise, you must manually configure your computer to use an IP address on the same subnet. After you connect your computer to Interface 1, make sure your computer gets an address on the 10.0.1.0/24 network. Connect Interface 0 to a router or network that has internet access. When you have everything connected, it should look like this. To start the web setup wizard, open a web browser, and then type https://10.0.1.1:8080 in the address bar. You might see a certificate warning in your browser warning have here if your Firebox uses a self-signed certificate. The warning will look different based on which browser you use. It's okay to go ahead and ignore this warning. When you see the Fireware Web UI login page, log in as an administrative user. To do this, type the username admin here and the default passphrase, which is read-write, here, which is read-write. You'll change to a more secure passphrase later in the setup process. The wizard has two configuration options. By default, the wizard creates a new device configuration, but you can also use the wizard to restore a saved backup image. Because I want to create a new configuration, I'll just click Next. When you see this page, make sure you review and accept the license agreement. The next step that appears depends upon the version of your Firebox. Don't worry if your wizard looks a little different than what you see here. The steps are pretty much the same in all versions of the web setup wizard. They might appear in a different order, however. In this video, we will go through the steps in the order they are presented in the version 11.10.1 web setup wizard. This is where you'll configure how your Firebox gets an external IP address. You can select from DHCP, PPPoE, or static. The option you choose will depend on what type of IP address you get from your ISP, which is why collecting network information before starting the web setup wizard is such a good idea. For this demonstration, I'll select DHCP. After you select the IP address type, it's time to fill in the more detailed information about your IP address. Depending on what type of IP address you use, the wizard requests different information. Adding information about the DNS and WIN is optional, but we recommend you do it now if you have the information. Remember, if you give your external interface a dynamic IP address, you can skip this step. Your Firebox will get this information automatically. Because I have a dynamic IP address, I'll leave these fields blank. This is where you set up the IP address for your trust Interface 1. Interface 1 is connected to your private network. By default, the IP address is set to 10.0.1.1, which is the same address used to connect to the web setup wizard. You can change this IP address to any private IP address you want to use. If you also want a DHCP server on this interface, select this checkbox to have the Firebox automatically assign an IP address to any device that connects to the trusted network. Use these fields to define the address range you want the Firebox to use to assign IP addresses. These addresses must be on the same network as the trusted interface IP address, but cannot overlap it. In the last few steps of the wizard, you're going to define some basic settings. Use this page to create passphrases. There are two management user accounts, admin and status. Make sure to select strong passphrases that are at least 8 characters long. If you want to manage your Firebox from home,